Let me take you back, not to a battlefield, not to a throne room, but to a road that began with a whisper and grew into a roar. A road that would one day connect for 1,000 miles of desert, mountains, rivers, and empires. It began with silk. We start in Han Dynasty, China. Around the year 138 BCE, the emperor's name was Wu of Han, young, ambitious, and curious about the lands that lay beyond the western deserts. Raiders from the steppes had been tormenting his borders, the Xiongnu, fierce warriors with fast horses and no loyalty to anything but their clans. Wu wanted allies, and so he sent a man. His name was Zhang Qian. He was a court official, barely known to history until now. Zhang Qian rode west with a small entourage through the narrow gates of the Gansu corridor into the unknown. The deserts of western China are cruel and endless. The Taklamakan, its name means you go in. You don't come out, but Zhang kept riding. Captured by the Xiongnu for 10 years, treated like a ghost. Most men would have turned back. He didn't. He finally escaped and reached the Fergana Valley, what is now Uzbekistan, and there he saw something extraordinary. Horses, not the shaggy steppe ponies of the Xiongnu. These were tall, muscular, bred for war. He called them heavenly horses, and he knew if China could trade silk for these horses, it could defeat the steppe raiders forever. So he returned 15 years after he had left and told the emperor, there are rich lands beyond the deserts. And they want what we have, silk, not the coarse fabric of shepherds, but the shimmering cloth of dragons, so fine it could pass through the eye of a needle. In the West, silk was unknown, mysterious. It shimmered like water and weighed like air. The Roman elite would pay its weight in gold just to wear it, so the caravans began. From Chang'an, the imperial capital, came horses laden with bolts of silk, porcelain, lacquerware, paper. Through Dunhuang, past ancient caves carved with prayers. Into the mountains of Pamir and the burning sands of the Karakum. This was not one road. It was a web, 1,000 tiny threads crossing each other like rivers in the desert. Merchants met at oases. Sogdian traders translated between Chinese, Persian, and Greek. Camels carried secrets. And in every market, in every tea house, under every tent, stories passed faster than goods. By the 1st century BCE, the Romans were wearing Chinese silk. The Chinese were eating grapes from Persia. And somewhere in the middle, an Armenian caravan leader was trading honey from Georgia for blue dyes from India. The world was touching hands for the first time, not through war, through trade. Through curiosity, through silk. But there were dangers too. Sandstorms could bury an entire caravan in an hour. Bandits stalked the high passes, and worse, diseases. Germs hitchhiked on the backs of merchants. Fleas traveled in bundles of wool. The road gave life and carried death, but still they came. From China, Persia, India, Bactria, Arabia. From Rome, the Silk Road was not just a trade route. It was an idea that strangers could meet, that people could talk, that the world could be bigger than borders, and it all started with one man. Riding west into a desert, chasing the unknown. By the end of the 1st century BCE, the Silk Road was no longer just an idea. It had become an artery of empires, pumping silk, gold, glass, horses, and people across the bones of continents. But it wasn't China that ruled the middle, it was the Parthians. From their capital in Ctesiphon, near the Tigris River in what is now Iraq, they played the East against the West. Like skilled merchants at a market stall, the Parthians didn't make silk. They didn't weave it or dye it, but they controlled its flow. And they taxed every bolt that passed through their deserts. The Romans hated them for it, but they still bought the silk. By 100 CE, in the courts of Rome, silk was everything. Senators whispered how it clung too closely to the skin, how it was unmanly, and yet they wore it under their togas. The wives of emperors paid for it by the ounce. And no one, not even Caesar, could resist the way it shimmered like moonlight. But while Rome consumed, other empires built. One of them rose in the shadows of the Hindu Kush, the Kushan Empire, a crossroads of cultures born in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Kushans spoke Greek, traded in Sanskrit, worshipped Persian gods, and minted coins with Roman-style busts. Their cities were full of temples, markets, and caravanserais. And most importantly, they were safe havens for traders. The Kushans understood something most empires didn't: commerce is peace. If you protect the road repays you. Their empire stretched from Bactria to the Ganges, binding India's spices and gemstones to China's silk and the West's thirst. And something else was riding those caravans now. Not just goods. Not just rumors, belief. For the first time in history, religion was moving on the wind of trade. Buddhist monks walked beside camel drivers. Zoroastrian fire priests lit sacred flames in the deserts of Persia. Indian sages offered mantras to curious foreigners. The Silk Road became a highway of the soul. By the time of Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire was brushing the edge of the Parthian world. And somewhere in the bazaar of Palmyra or the mountain town of Merv, a Roman merchant sat under a silk tent, sipping tea brewed with Himalayan snowmalt, while a Chinese trader bartered with Sogdian silver. And across the world, the names of cities like Taxila, Balkh, and Samarkand began to echo, not as remote places, but as the beating hearts of global trade. No kings met, no armies clashed, but here, in the silence between the hooves, the world began to fold together. The Silk Road was not just a road, it was a network of trust. A Sogdian merchant could pass a letter through 5 hands, 5 languages, 5 empires, and know it would reach its destination. A Kashmiri sage could send scripture to a temple in Luoyang. A Roman coin could end up in a tomb in Korea. The fabric of the road was woven not just with silk, but with faith. With the belief that somewhere out there, far across the dunes, someone would keep your word. And though the road was young, already it had changed the world. The year is 200 CE. Empires are crumbling. The Roman Empire has fractured into civil war and chaos. The mighty Han Dynasty of China, the very empire that opened the Silk Road, has fallen, and yet the road remains. Not because of governments or armies, but because of the traders, the pilgrims, the wanderers who refused to let it die. In the West, a new empire rises from the ashes of Persia, the Sassanids. Elegant, organized, ruthless, they command the middle of the world. From Ctesiphon, their capital near the Tigris River, they tax every merchant, guard every caravanserai, and turn Persia into the tollbooth of civilization. Their wealth grows not by conquest, but by controlling the flow. To the south, in India, the Gupta Empire sparks a golden age. They do not just build cities. They give the world zero, decimal math, Ayurvedic medicine, and epic literature. And the Silk Road becomes their pipeline to the world. Not just goods are traded now, but ideas. Silk goes west, but science goes east. Astronomers carry constellations, healers trade herbs and surgical tools. Philosophers teach and debate in roadside shrines. The road becomes a classroom of civilizations, but hidden in the shadows of trade comes death. In 541 CE in the Eastern Roman Empire, it begins. They called it the Plague of Justinian. But it came, many believe, from the Silk Road, from India or China, riding in bundles of cloth, in fur, in wheat. Rats and fleas carried the disease, and within 2 years, 25 million people were gone. Constantinople collapsed into silence, the empire shrank, markets emptied, and yet the road did not close. Because it couldn't, even death could not stop the desire to connect. And far to the east, a new force was rising, the Tang Dynasty of China. Where others had fallen, they rose, proud, multicultural, open to the world. Their capital, Chang'an, became the most international city on earth. In the alleys, Persian traders, Turkish herders, Indian monks, Sogdian translators. In the markets, spices, glass, tea, papyrus, silver, porcelain, lapis lazuli, incense. In the air, a dozen languages and none of them forbidden. The Tang understood the true wealth of the Silk Road, diversity. And they protected it. Buddhism flowed in waves from India into China. Monks carved scriptures into mountain caves in Dunhuang. Merchants funded temples and translated texts. Pilgrims walked barefoot across continents, just to learn, just to pass the knowledge on. This was no longer just a trade route, it was a river of faith and thought. The great oasis of Central Asia, Khotan, Samarkand, Merv, Balkh, bloomed into crossroads of civilization. You could eat Persian stew, read Indian sutras, trade Chinese silk, and hire a Sogdian guide, all in one day. Here, you were not judged by your origin, only by what you could carry, what you could translate, what you could teach. These cities became mirrors of the world, long before the modern world knew itself. And though emperors still clashed in the distance, the road did something remarkable. It kept people talking, and when people talk, there is hope. The Silk Road was not about borders, it was about the space between them. The Silk Road changed again, not because of silk, not because of war, but because of something more powerful: curiosity. In the year 760 to CE, a new city rose from the desert beside the Tigris River, a round city. Walled, planned, and glowing with lamps, Baghdad, founded by the Abbasid Caliphate, it was more than a capital, it was a magnet for minds. They called it the City of Peace, and in its heart they built a house not of gold or stone, but of knowledge, Beit al-Hikmah, the house of wisdom. Here, scribes and scholars from every corner of the known world gathered to do something unheard of: translate. From Greek to Arabic, from Sanskrit to Persian, from Chinese scrolls to Chaldean tablets, knowledge that had been trapped for centuries in dead empires, unlocked. In Baghdad, Pythagoras met Indian numerals. Galen debated with Chinese herbalists, algebra was born, astronomy expanded. Medicine, chemistry, geography, all rewritten. And it all traveled on the Silk Road, not just on camels, but in the minds of doctors, mathematicians, poets, and travelers. Paper, invented in Han China, was now everywhere. Ink, maps, libraries, the world was learning to write itself down. Cities like Nishapur, Merv, and Bukhara grew into knowledge bazaars, where a rare book could be worth more than a horse. And in the East, Tang China was at its peak, a mirror to Baghdad's brilliance. In Chang'an, poets walked alongside merchants. Buddhist pilgrims from India exchanged texts with Confucian scholars. Silk was still traded, but ideas were the real currency now. From Toledo to Taxila, the road had become a neural network of civilization. The Silk Road didn't just link countries, it linked eras. It carried forward what others tried to bury: ancient math, lost medicine, forgotten maps. A 9th century scholar in Persia could read what a 2nd century Greek had written because the road made it possible. This wasn't just East meeting West, this was the world remembering itself. And in that age, for a brief and shining moment, truth moved faster than armies. The Silk Road became the world's first library without walls, a living encyclopedia. A place where a merchant could trade spices and go home with a cure, a book, or a star chart. But golden ages, like caravans, are always moving. Shadows were returning in the mountains, in the borders. And soon, the road would face new riders, not traders, but warriors. The road was quiet again, not from peace, but from fear. The cities once lit by knowledge began to flicker. Bukhara, Merv, Samarkand, oases of learning, suddenly in the path of war. It began in the steppe, that endless ocean of grass stretching across Central Asia. For centuries, it had birthed riders who came and went like storms. But in the early 13th century, the storm had a name: Temujin, a boy born into blood, exile, and hunger. By the time he died, the world knew him as Genghis Khan. He was not a king. He did not wear silk, but his horses would change the course of the Silk Road forever. Genghis Khan's armies moved faster than any before them. They crossed mountains in weeks, deserts in days. In 1219, they rode west into the cities of Central Asia. Bukhara burned, Merv drowned in blood. Nishapur was silenced, the Silk Road shattered. Caravans stopped, markets emptied, thousands of miles of culture went dark. But Genghis was not just a destroyer, he understood something no emperor before him did. Power was not in walls or armies. It was in information, and so, once the cities surrendered, he protected them. He reopened the Silk Road under Mongol law. His empire became the largest free trade zone in human history. From the Pacific to the Black Sea, one law ruled, one tax. One system of messengers, the Yam, carrying letters and goods faster than ever before. Under his heirs, especially Kublai Khan, the road reached its peak, cities rebuilt, trade flourished, and the world, for a brief moment, felt connected by trust again. Paper money was introduced in China and accepted as far west as Persia. Persian engineers built water systems in China. Chinese doctors worked in Baghdad. And for the first time since Rome, Europe looked east again, not with fear, but fascination. One man followed that fascination, a merchant from Venice, young and curious. His name was Marco Polo. He arrived in Kublai Khan's China around 1275, and when he returned to Europe years later, he brought something far greater than silk, stories, maps, ideas, a vision of a world larger than Europe had ever imagined. But even as the Mongol Empire held the road open, a new shadow crept behind the caravans. A whisper in the fur, a sickness in the grain. It came not from a sword, but from a flea, from somewhere along the Silk Road, perhaps from Yunnan, perhaps from Central Asia. A killer began to move west. Not a conqueror, not a general, but a bacterium. The Silk Road had once carried knowledge across continents. Now it would carry the Black Death. By the mid-14th century, something moved faster than armies. It did not speak, it did not ride, it flew with rats, and it killed with breath. They called it the Black Death. It likely began in Central Asia, a hidden mutation riding a caravan westward. The Silk Road, once a river of light, had become the bloodstream of a killer. By the time it reached the Crimean port of Kaffa, it had infected the cargo. From there, ships carried it to Constantinople, Venice, Florence, Paris, London. In just 5 years, over 200 million people were dead. Entire villages vanished, the roads went silent. The Silk Road didn't close by decree, it choked, the Mongol Empire fractured. The Ilkhanate collapsed, the Yuan dynasty fell in China, and local rulers began closing borders, blocking foreign goods, fearing what the road now carried. For centuries, the Silk Road had connected humanity. Now it isolated it, and while the dust settled in the east, a new hunger grew in the west. In cities like Lisbon, Genoa, and Seville, merchants stared at fading maps, wondering how to reach the spices and silks without crossing the deadly land routes. So they built ships. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea. In 1514, Portuguese vessels reached China's shores. And suddenly, the Silk Road had a rival, one that didn't depend on mountains, deserts, or camels. The world had changed. The Silk Road, after over 1,600 years, faded into history. But what it gave us never left. It gave us paper, and with it, books, contracts, revolutions. It gave us religions, stitched together in the temples of Bactria and the caves of Dunhuang. It gave us science, math from India, medicine from Persia, astronomy from China, exchanged freely before politics knew how to weaponize it. It gave us words, languages that blended in markets and became bridges. It even gave us our first taste of globalization, the belief that strangers, through trust, could build something vast. And perhaps more importantly, it gave us a blueprint, a vision of what humanity can do when we trade more than just goods, when we trade stories, when we trade beliefs, when we meet in the middle. Today, we build fiber optic silk roads, invisible and instant, but the heart is the same. Every time you send a message, buy from across the world, watch a film in another tongue, you walk the Silk Road again. So was this the end of the road? No, just its transformation, from dust to data, from caravans to code, from silence to the network that still binds the world.